But you want to like ride the dick of diet culture so hard.
Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Katie, and for those of you who don't know me, I used to weigh 360 pounds, and I've lost 180 pounds and kept it off for years now. And on this channel, we will discuss weight loss, weight maintenance, nonsense I see online about body positivity and fat acceptance, my experiences with all of that, and well, anything else I feel like talking about. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below, and let's get into today's video. So today I have several TikToks from our friend to the channel, Hannah, or as some of you may remember her as the fat activist who was scared to go to the gym. And she's got some thoughts on suitable conversations regarding weight. So I figure we'll go ahead and watch these together and I'll give you my reactions along the way.
This is a PSA to say that weight loss and your latest diet is not a suitable conversation with anybody.
With anybody? Not even including doctors or your partner? It's not a suitable conversation for anybody? Okay, well, I guess let's see what she has to say about that.
Let alone strangers. I find it bafflingly tone deaf how readily people will talk about it, be it in workplaces or Uber drivers or strangers you just meet like on trains, whatever it might be. These have all happened to me.
Okay, but I'm genuinely curious when she's talking about these things that have happened to her. What did that conversation actually look like? I mean, I'm not going to say that people can't be rude and say things completely out of pocket. I mean, I worked for so long with the public that, yeah, I've heard so many crazy things come out of people's mouths. But I also know if it's just a stranger or somebody I'm never going to see again, I mean, if anything, I'm kind of grateful that they showed me that they were a jerk and that I don't have to care about their opinion or think about them again. But I am kind of curious what these conversations looked like because she also lumped workplace in there as well. And so that's the thing. I mean, some of my coworkers definitely noticed that I had lost weight over the years. And whether or not I was even the one bringing it up, it would sometimes become a topic of conversation. So people would just ask questions or want to know what was going on in my life. So I'm kind of confused by the workplace being thrown in with the other random strangers, other than these were just conversations that happened to her, I suppose. But when you're in the workplace and you're dealing with coworkers, I mean, most people are going to talk about the things that are going on in their life. And they're often going to stick with general topics that most people are going to kind of have in common. So I've heard a lot of people talk about their kids or their pets. It could be the weather, or it could be sports or current events that are going on, or it could be food or what they're having for dinner that night, or what they had for dinner the night before, or what they're going to have when they're going for lunch. So I am kind of curious what those conversations were.
It is not a suitable conversation to be having with anybody without a very obvious green light that is something the other person wants to partake in.
Okay, but how would you get that green light unless you bring up the topic of conversation? I'm just genuinely curious. How on earth do you know if somebody wants to talk about something unless you bring it up? And then the other person either engages with that conversation or says, nah, I don't really want to talk about it, or brings up something else they want to talk about instead. I'm genuinely curious. How are we supposed to get there without having at least the topic brought up in conversation? I don't know. Maybe she will explain for us.
We live in our society. I think every single one of us has a nuanced take on diet culture and weight loss. Obviously, some is positive and some of it's negative. But let's not assume that everyone's experience is positive, and let's just not talk about it. I'd much rather talk about anything else than those things. Please. Thank you.
I mean, anything else? I mean, I'm sure I could probably come up with some topics that she wouldn't want to talk about either, but we won't play that game. So yeah, I'm genuinely curious how our friend here expects people to have a conversation if you can't even bring up a topic of conversation. I'm genuinely curious. I mean, it's one thing if it's somebody that you do know and you've already had the conversation of, hey, I don't really want to talk about that with them. But she listed off a whole bunch of strangers too, like Uber drivers or on the train or just strangers, right? How is a stranger going to know if it's a suitable conversation unless they bring up the topic? I'm genuinely curious. Is there another form of communication that I am just unaware of? I mean, do people have telepathy that I just never inherited? Or do we have to actually bring up a topic of conversation and then, interact with the other person to see if they want to talk about it? And I'm just genuinely curious. And then this notion of, well, not everyone wants to talk about it. And I understand that this is not going to be a topic of conversation for everyone, and that's perfectly fine. But I did happen to look this up right before filming, and I did look up the statistics, at least in the United States. And 50% of US adults are estimated to be on a diet or meal plan of some sort right now, currently, as we speak. And then on top of that, at least 80% of US adults are estimated to have been on a diet or meal plan of some sort throughout any portion of their life. I also saw statistics that anywhere from 12 to, I believe, 14% of the US adult population has already tried some sort of GLP-1 medication. So just based off of understanding that, it would seem that for a large number of people that is a conversation that is kind of common ground, where you can find something that you have in common with another person. And even if you do it a different way or you have a different method, like she was saying, there are a lot of nuanced takes when it comes to weight loss and all of that, absolutely. But at the end of the day, you can find the common ground of, hey, you're doing this for your health and I'm doing this for my health. Wonderful. We found things that work for our health. So I find that people do try to find topics of conversation that they have common ground with other people. So knowing that so many people either have been or are currently using some sort of meal plan or diet, then yeah, it stands to reason that that is something people are going to have in common with a lot of other people right now. So I'm just genuinely curious how on earth people are supposed to have conversations if you can't even bring up the topic of conversation. And again, if you don't wish to talk about something, you're under no obligation to ever. And if it's somebody that you're going to have to see again in the future, not just a stranger, you are 100% well within your rights to lay down a boundary and just tell them you don't wish to talk about that. But maybe that's just me. Let's go ahead and see what our friend has to say here in the next one.
How normalised we have made it seem to talk about weight loss and diet culture with anybody. I mean strangers, I mean people in the workplace, acquaintances.
Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about those individually. So we'll talk about strangers. So maybe this is just my experience from working with the general public for decades. Strangers are going to talk about, well, literally just about anything. I cannot even begin to tell you all of the things that I have been told over the years in customer service. Oh my goodness. Like the number of people that would just tell you their entire life story. And the only thing you ask them is, what can I get for you today? And then, next thing you know about their pets, their family, their house, their job, their everything. Some people really just are oversharers like that. I'm definitely going to say that when you're dealing with the general public. Now, most people are not like that, of course, but you will find those people for sure. So then we get to workplace. Well, okay, that's the thing. If you're working beside someone or alongside someone for months or years and their appearance changes, you're probably going to notice that, right? And I'm not just talking about weight when we're talking about appearance changes either, but like say somebody comes in with a new haircut or a new hair color. Most people are going to notice that and probably comment on it, right? So it's not out of the ordinary for people to notice when your appearance does change. And again, when we're talking about acquaintances, that's implying we're talking about people that you have at least previously met at least one time, right? So if you look different from the last time they've seen you, again, they'll probably notice. Or if you do look drastically different, they might not recognize you and you might have to let them know you are who you are. Or, at least that's something that has happened to me and a lot, to be perfectly fair. If it's someone I haven't seen in a while, I may have to jog their memory a little bit for them because they might not recognize me. And so if I jog an acquaintance's memory and remind them of who I am, and they only have a reference point from when I was heavier, am I bringing up my weight loss, or am I just reminding them who I am? Because that's the thing. When she's saying that these conversations are being brought up around diet and weight loss, what do those conversations actually look like? Is it something as simple and innocuous as somebody talking about what they're going to be making for dinner that night? Or is it somebody giving a detailed plan of what they eat every day to meet their calorie goals? I mean, there is a huge difference between the two in a conversation, but I am genuinely curious to see what she would consider to be a conversation about diet or weight loss.
There were a few people in the comments section talking about how that they want to talk about their weight loss. Yeah, good. Talk about it with people who then want to talk about it. It is.
And again, the question that I had from the last TikTok is, how would you know if somebody wants to talk about it unless you bring up that topic of conversation? I'm still genuinely curious how one goes about that. If there's something I am missing, please let me know in the comments down below. I would love to be corrected on this. Truly. I would love to know if there is something I'm missing out on. But let's go ahead and read this comment that she is responding to. Okay, it says, I don't know. I've lost 3 stone. I'm working hard. I want to talk about it. I'm so proud of myself. I'm still 6 stone overweight. I want to talk about it to big myself up, not shame others. So to that original commenter, I just would like to say, well done. Congratulations. That is definitely no easy feat. So that being said, I totally understand the idea of wanting to talk about the things that are going on in your life, especially if you feel they are beneficial or helping you, or if you feel like you are accomplishing something. I mean, people talk about accomplishments in so many avenues of their lives all the time, whether that could be you get a promotion at your job, maybe you make a large purchase like a house or a car, or maybe it's something like you put in a garden and you just feel very accomplished about that. And it's not trying to tell people that you're better than other people who haven't done those things, but just more the idea that, hey, I feel accomplished. I was able to go out and do this thing that I was working hard towards. I just find it very ironic that we are allowed to have a sense of accomplishment in other areas of our lives. But according to fat acceptance or body positivity, in many cases, when it comes to weight loss, that's just the one area in our lives we are not allowed to have a sense of accomplishment whatsoever. That even though they'll tell you how difficult or nigh impossible it is for people to lose weight, and when you do the very difficult or supposedly impossible thing, shouldn't that be a cause for celebration? I mean, it just makes no sense to me that on one hand, they'll tell you how difficult or how impossible it is or how all the ways you're going to fail if you try to do this thing. And then you go and you do the thing, and then they tell you not to take a sense of accomplishment from it and not talk to people about it. Because that's the thing. I can understand why this commenter left this comment. Because in the original TikTok we just watched, she started off very strong by saying that it's not a topic for anybody. Literally anybody. So again, I'm going to ask our friend here, does that include doctors? Does that include your partner? I mean, when I hear it's not suitable for anybody to talk about, it sounds like it's the worst thing in the entire world that is so tabooed, like he who shall not be named. I mean, that's what it sounds like when I hear her say it's not a suitable topic for anybody. I can understand if she said it's not a suitable topic for everybody. That I could understand and actually probably agree with, to be perfectly fair. But that's not what our friend said in that original TikTok. She said it's not suitable for anybody. So yes, I can very much understand that there are times you do want to talk about it. And that should absolutely be okay. Just like any other accomplishment in life.
Perfectly healthy conversational habit, a skilled conversationalist to ensure the person that you're in conversation with wants to talk to you about whatever it is you're talking about.
And again, how does that happen unless somebody brings up that topic of conversation? And then if you don't wish to talk about it, you can just say, no thanks, I don't wish to talk about it. It's really that simple. But unless you have already set that boundary, no one is going to know whether or not it's a suitable topic of conversation. So I just don't understand. Is she expecting people to read minds? Is it supposed to be just like, again, some mental telepathy that I just never achieved? Is that what we're supposed to do? Because, I mean, I gotta say, I've had lots of conversations with lots of different people throughout my life. And it's very easy to test the waters and just kind of throw something out there, bring up a topic of conversation, and see how the other person responds. But unless you bring that up, you don't get the response from the other person, and you can't just assume how the other person will respond. And if somebody doesn't wish to talk about it, you move on and you change the subject. These things aren't that difficult, but yet she's making it seem like we're just supposed to know these things without bringing them up. And that's the part that I just don't understand. How are we supposed to know these things without talking about them, at least on a surface general level?
That's why we say things like, oh, no politics, please. Because
yes, exactly. And then you set the boundary. And then if somebody wishes to still go past it and then talk about politics, you either A, know what type of person they are, or B, you can just remind them, hey, I told you I don't want to talk about that. And their response will tell you volumes about who they are as a person. So I'm not sure why it would be so difficult to do when it comes to talking about diets or weight loss. I'm really not sure why that would be so difficult.
sometimes that makes us uncomfortable. Now, don't get me wrong, if I'm engaging in a conversation with a stranger and they all of a sudden turn it to weight loss and diet culture, it is on me to indicate whether I am uncomfortable with that. But the other person, why do they think it's a normal conversation topic to begin with?
For the same reason I mentioned previously, because it's something that a lot of people do have in common with other adults. 50% of US adults are currently on some sort of diet or meal plan. So it would stand to reason you've got a 1 in 2 chance of finding somebody who you could talk to about that. That's a pretty generalized topic of conversation to bring up to people, actually. And I get it that also means 50% of the population isn't a part of that group, and I fully understand that as well. But again, that's why we can bring up topics of conversation, and then if people don't wish to partake in that conversation, they can either set their boundary or they can remove themselves from the conversation. And it really doesn't have to be that deep. People are just trying to find topics that they have in common with other people. I mean, I know from my experience dealing with customer service that a nice conversation I could bring up with customers right now if I were working would be my baseball team, the Cleveland Guardians. So they're doing really well. They're in the playoffs right now, which, go Guards, just saying. Gotta end the World Series drought. You have no idea. But I also understand that as popular as those conversations would be with a good portion of people in my area right now, there's going to be a lot of people that aren't paying any attention, that don't care, that don't want to talk sports because they're just not into it no matter what. So I understand that there's always going to be conversations that no matter how popular they might be, that there's going to be people that just don't want to talk about it. And like she correctly finally assessed, it's up to her to put down that boundary and say she doesn't want to talk about it. And that's the thing. Once you set your boundary, you also have to uphold your boundary. Yes, they now have the information that they should not bring that topic up with you. But if they do again, you're now going to have to enforce that boundary and more than likely leave that conversation. So I understand the frustration of getting stuck in conversations you really don't want to have. But there are ways of dealing with it, and it doesn't come down to you're not allowed to talk about that.
And that's what I'm highlighting. Come on, where we are in the culture, where weight loss and diet culture is so prevalent, it's very loud for a lot of us in the moment, and we are also super aware of how nuanced everyone's relationship with food is.
Okay, wow, she said a lot there. And she's saying that in this current climate, that diet culture and talk of food and all of these things are just so incredibly prevalent, right? But I gotta say, at least anecdotally, my own personal experience on this, I really have watched how body positivity has entered the mainstream in so many ways. So if our friend here thinks that our current climate is just full of toxic diet culture, I mean, there's a couple of things that I will say to that. The first thing I will say is I don't think social media has helped a whole lot of people when it comes to some of this stuff, because there is a whole lot of misinformation out there, And what you're seeing on social media is what many of us saw in mainstream media growing up in the 80s and 90s. So at least on the mainstream media front, that has kind of gone away. I'm not saying it's fully gone by any stretch, but I will say that it was just absolutely everywhere there for a long time growing up in the 80s, the 90s, even the early 2000s. So to not acknowledge the shift that has happened in the mid to late 2000s and beyond, I gotta say, it does feel just a bit disingenuous. And another thing I'd like to point out, and again, I know this is just my own experience here, in the decades that I worked with a very large number of people, all in diverse age groups, backgrounds, etc., there was a lot more talk about food than there ever was about diet culture or weight loss, if I'm being perfectly fair. There may have been comments here or there like, I'd like to lose weight, right before people went to the break room and had somebody's birthday cake. Or they would talk about, oh yeah, I'd really like to, lose weight for New Year's. And then they would go get donuts from the break room. Or how many conversations that I was either a part of or heard where people were talking about what they ate the night before for dinner, what they're going to eat for lunch, what they're going to make for dinner when they get home. I mean, the amount of times I heard people talking about food, it was astronomical. And it really didn't matter where I worked, whether it was restaurant, retail, in an office, none of that mattered. Everybody always talked about food. Why? Because again, that's something that is very common with everybody. I mean, we all have to eat, right? So that's a very common topic of conversation. And so she talks about these conversations about diet and weight loss as if these are the only things that people are ever talking about at a workplace or with acquaintances or with strangers. And I gotta be honest, if we're talking about a topic that's going to cover that base, food was the topic that covered all of those bases, at least from all of my experience. Diet and weight loss were very niche topics that people would bring up and test the waters. But a lot of people would often just laugh and go, well, yeah, but I like cake too much. And they'd walk away. I mean, I've literally seen those responses to those types of conversations too. So I do understand that people are going to bring up diets and weight loss, but they're also going to bring up movies and TV shows that they've just seen, or their sports teams, or the weather, or a lot of topics of conversation. But probably by and large, the number one conversation that I've had with customers, coworkers, everybody that I have dealt with on that type of level, dealing with like the general public, food was always the number one topic of conversation. So I just find it kind of funny that she's talking like this is just everybody's topic of conversation every single day. And I understand that there are people that may be like that. But again, by and large, the number one conversation that I had with people over the years was food related in one way or another.
It could be positive relationship, it could be negative relationship, but we all have a very nuanced relationship with it, okay? Someone said in the comments, and it was such a fantastic point of view, is at the moment, when we look at green light topics of conversation, diet culture and weight loss is in there with the weather. With the weather, that's insane, no?
No, it's not insane, because that's the thing. Weather affects all of us. Just like people are going to bring up food, because everyone's got to eat. And sometimes when you talk about food, people will talk about diet or weight loss when it comes along with that. But to say that weather is always a light topic of conversation, I'm going to have to politely disagree in every way possible. Yeah, it could be a pleasant conversation. I mean, today's a beautiful fall sunny day. So if you were going to talk about the weather where I live today, yeah, absolutely lovely. But at least as of time of filming, I mean, Hurricane Milton is brewing in the Gulf right now. So a lot of people are talking about weather in not light ways right now, in very heavy ways right now, especially after the devastation of Hurricane Helene. So yeah, sometimes weather is a nice, light, pleasant conversation. But if you live in a place where weather can get volatile, it's not always a pleasant conversation. There's been plenty of conversations I've had in my life where the weather conversation turns into quickly, Yeah, did you hear about the tornado that hit up the road? Yeah, did you hear about so-and-so who had their basement flooded and lost everything? Did you hear about so-and-so who had a tree fall on their house because a whole bunch of wind came through? Or did you hear about so-and-so who got in a pileup during the middle of a giant snowstorm? Those are conversations that have definitely happened in my life around weather. So if she's going to say that those are always light topics of conversation, I'm going to guess that's in places that don't really have a whole lot of unpleasant weather. So yeah, it can be a lighthearted conversation. Absolutely. It could also be a conversation about how people may have lost their lives, their livelihoods, their homes, everything they've ever worked for in their life. I mean, so yeah, it's not always a light and easygoing conversation when you're talking about the weather.
That's insane. And this individualistic way of thinking, which is like, well, I want to talk about it, so I want to talk about it. Do you not care, like, how uncomfortable you might be making other people? I would hate to be in a conversation that was actively making people uncomfortable.
And again, how would people know that unless you bring up that topic of conversation? And then, if you don't wish to talk about it, set your boundary. And if that person wishes to still continue talking about it after you set your boundary, you got to then enforce your boundary and either remove yourself from the conversation, change the topic, whatever you need to do. I mean, I'm not sure what else our friend here expects. It's almost sounding like she doesn't want anybody to talk about this. I mean, she did tell us in the first one that it's not a suitable conversation for anybody. So it feels like she's projecting that onto everyone else when, yes, there are people who do wish to talk about it, and there are people that do wish to listen to those conversations too. So I do understand that not every conversation is for everyone, but that's why it's up to you to set your own boundaries and remove yourself from conversations you don't wish to be a part of. And I mean, I gotta say, I guess I've just learned over the years, and sometimes I've learned the hard way, but you cannot make other people responsible for your own triggers. You cannot expect that other people are going to know all of the time how to act, how to speak, how to think around you. You just can't expect that of other people. That's why it's so important to set your boundary. And then if they do cross that boundary, then you've got to enforce it one way or another. Change the subject, leave the conversation. I mean, if it's a stranger, you can just scoot on out of there and never see them again. So I understand that not everyone is going to want to have every conversation, but I also very much understand that you cannot make other people responsible for what triggers you, and you cannot project that onto other people and tell them what conversations they're allowed to have with other people.
But you want to, like, ride the dick of diet culture so hard that you don't care. You want the praise that comes with it. And the thing is,
or people just want to talk about what they wish to talk about. That first part of that clip threw me for a loop. Whoa.
Truly hope you get what you're looking for from people who want to have that conversation with you. The whole point in that video is that not everyone wants to have that conversation, and it's having a bit of fucking self-awareness to recognize that, and also maybe recognize why.
Okay, but again, in that first video, she said at the very beginning that it is not a suitable conversation for anybody. And now she's backtracking and saying, well, you need the green light from people, and you need to understand not everyone wants to have that conversation, which I understand and I fully agree with, and I can totally support that. But again, how do we get to that place unless somebody brings up that topic of conversation? And again, are we then pushing it off onto other people to know that they're just not supposed to talk about it? They're just supposed to look at me and understand what they're allowed to talk to me about? Is that what we're expecting of people? I mean, have I been doing conversations wrong my whole life? That could explain some things, I will say, but I'm genuinely curious, like, what she is expecting of people on a real level. That we're just supposed to look at people and understand, oh, this is a topic I shouldn't bring up. Oh, this is a topic I can't talk about with anybody. Making it sound like weight loss is shameful somehow and we must hide it away? I mean, I gotta be honest, when you go through a drastic transformation, even if you wish to hide away, you can't. People are gonna bring it up even if you don't want to talk about it. I can't even begin to tell you how many times I talked about weight loss with people in conversations where they were the ones who brought it up. So when you do change appearance, I think it's fairly common to understand that people are going to comment one way or another about it. So, I mean, if she got her hair cut, wouldn't she want people to notice that? Wouldn't she want people to tell her that it looks great? Wouldn't she want that? I mean, that's something that I've seen over and over again where people were like, wow, I got my hair cut and nobody even noticed. And that felt terrible. And I didn't even get one single compliment on it, or they must all hate it. I mean, I'm genuinely curious. If our friend here got a different hairstyle, wouldn't she expect that people are going to comment on that? So if you change your entire body by losing weight, aren't people going to comment on that even if you're not the one bringing it up? After a certain point, people are just going to talk about what they're observing with their own eyes?
That might be. Ultimately, if you really want to talk about diet culture and weight loss with every Tom, Dick and Harry you come across, then you must be a boring person who has nothing else to talk about.
Wow, and the goalposts keep moving further. It went from, this isn't a suitable topic for you to talk about with anybody, to now evidently people want to talk about it with everybody, every Tom and Harry, right? I mean, she's moving the goalposts and then trying to respond to that commenter like she didn't just backtrack on so many things that she said in that first one. I mean, in that first one, she was very clear that it's not a topic that's suitable for anybody. Where in this one, now she says that you're evidently allowed to talk about it with people that give you those green lights, right? And that evidently, if you get those green lights, you're going to want to talk about it with everyone now? Where this is the thing. You can't word and thought police other people. All you can do is set your boundaries and say, I don't wish to talk about it. And then if they do wish to continue on, you can remove yourself from that conversation. And when you're having a conversation with somebody, isn't it a two-way street? And as seems to be the pattern with fat acceptance, yet again, they are pushing the responsibility on everyone else. These are the topics you aren't allowed to talk about, not I have to remove myself from this conversation if somebody brings up a topic I don't wish to talk about. They have a whole list of all the ways that they think people or society are supposed to change for them. But yet, I never hear from this movement how they're going to be a part of this two-way conversation, this two-way street where things go back and forth. They don't want that. They want everyone else to change just to accommodate them. But they're not willing to accommodate literally anyone or anything else. But let's go ahead and see what our friend has to say in this last TikTok. Okay, so let's go ahead and read the text on the screen that accompanied this. It says, I lied. Put your clothes back on. We're really going to talk about how we all assume everyone wants to be a smaller size and weight, which is why diets are so readily spoken about in the workplace, why we assume that anyone who does exercise must be for weight loss purposes. They assume you want to lose weight for your wedding or your holiday. Why fashion brands don't invest in their plus size ranges because they believe their consumer base, quote, won't be that size for long. Our bodies are always treated like transient states separate to our souls, which are, quote, holding us back, instead of being seen and respected as the most permanent part of us. But if you aren't actively pursuing weight loss, you are seen as glamorizing an unhealthy lifestyle. Wow, that is a lot. So let's go ahead and break some of that down. Okay, so first off, this is a trend for this style of video if you aren't familiar with TikTok and you just allow me to rot my brain for you. No worries, I will take one for the team. But that being said, okay, why would we assume that everyone wants to be a smaller size and weight? Well, I've already given the statistics. At least in America, there's a 1 in 2 chance that somebody is on a diet or a meal plan. So as long as those statistics are accurate, that's almost a majority. So I'm not going to say that everyone wants to, but I will say that it's obviously fairly popular. I mean, isn't that the #1 New Year's resolution pretty much every year? So it seems like this is a very popular thing for people to pursue. Okay, which is why diets are so readily spoken about in the workplace. And like I pointed out, I think food was much more commonly talked about in the workplace than diet. I mean, I did hear people talking about diets from time to time, for sure. But food, that was like a daily thing that almost everybody would talk about. What they had for lunch, what they were going to have for lunch, what they're going to have for dinner, what they had for dinner, what they're doing this weekend, what food they're going to eat, or what drinks they're going to have. I mean, these are just abundant conversations that I've heard at every single workplace I've ever been at. Okay, why we assume that anyone who does exercise must be for weight loss purposes? I don't think we assume that anybody who is doing that is doing it for weight loss purposes. I mean, if I see a bodybuilder in the gym, I'm going to assume that they're building muscle, right? So I definitely don't assume that everybody works out for weight loss. But I definitely will admit, if you are a larger person and you start working out, yeah, I think most people will assume that you're doing it to lose weight. I mean, you can work out for whatever reason you want to, but yeah, I do think that that is pretty fair that people will assume you are trying to lose weight. They assume you want to lose weight for your wedding or your holiday. And again, this is just my experience. Yeah, a lot of people did want to lose weight for a wedding. Absolutely. That was a timeline that gave people a set goal. Like, oh, this wedding is going to be 1 year from now. So maybe in 1 year I can lose 30 pounds. That was a very common thing I heard a lot of people talking about. And part of the reason that I did hear a lot of people talking about, I must admit, was that particular job where I heard people talking about weddings all the time, that's for sure. So I did work for a number of years at Men's Warehouse, and I worked in the tuxedo rentals. So that was a good portion of what I did was weddings. And this is definitely not specific to women. Men very much wanted to lose weight before their wedding as well. So if they would come in early for their tux fitting, for example, and say it was still like 6 months out before their wedding, and I would just tell everybody when they were coming in for a fitting that if they gained or lost, more than about 5 or 10 pounds, to come back in for another fitting before the wedding, so that way we could make sure they were in the right size. Because about 10 pounds was typically where we saw a difference in sizing for most people. So that was something that I did hear a lot of people talk about. So I'm not going to say that, again, everybody wanted to lose weight for a wedding. But again, I do think it's fairly common, which is why people will talk about it. And I can understand it's frustrating that people will assume things, but all you have to do is just tell them that their assumptions are wrong, and then you can move about your day. Why fashion brands won't invest in their plus size ranges because they believe their customer base, quote, won't be that size for too long. So is it that these brands are making assumptions about their customer base, or is it these brands have done research about their customer base? Because there was actually something very interesting that I did read not that long ago. And that is, if somebody has been overweight for the majority of their life, someone who grew up fat and then became a fat adult, right? They are much more likely to be willing to go and buy a wardrobe in that size, whatever size they currently are. They are much more likely to go and buy a whole bunch of clothes in that size because their frame of reference is that they've always been large and they believe they always will be large. But then when you have someone who wasn't always fat, and then over the course of many years, they put on weight for different reasons. Maybe they had children, maybe they got married, maybe they changed jobs and they're a lot more sedentary now, and it starts creeping up on people. They do believe that they will be able to return back to their smaller size. Even if they don't have a plan in place to make this happen, they believe that they will get the baby weight off, for example, and that they will return to the size that they wore before they got pregnant. So with that mindset, those individuals aren't willing to invest in an entire wardrobe at that point because they view this as a temporary thing. So again, I ask the question, is it that brands have made assumptions about the customer base, or have they done their research? Our bodies are always treated like transient states, separate to our souls, which are, quote, holding us back, instead of being seen as respected and the most permanent part of us. Okay, so with that, that is what the research indicates, is that's how people view themselves, as transient beings, that we do grow and change and evolve over time. And that can be physically, that can be mentally, that can be spiritually, it can be in a multitude of ways that you grow and change. And so I think that is a big reason why people do view it that way. And then another reason why I think people do view it that way has to do with the language directly from fat acceptance and body positivity. Many times they won't use the words overweight or obese. That one is especially looked down upon. Or some won't use the word fat. And so what they'll say is that they are living in a larger body, making it seem that they just reside in their meat sack and that someday they will no longer live in that body. It's a very strange way that it's been worded, if I'm being quite honest. And it does feel like people within this movement are trying to disconnect from their bodies and the ownership of their bodies. So I find it very funny that our friend is pointing this out when, in this case, the call is coming from inside the house. This is language coming directly from fat acceptance or fat liberation or whatever you wish to call it. And to say that our bodies are the most permanent form of us, I mean, I can think of a multitude of ways that is inaccurate. Because if our bodies were permanent, none of us would age. None of us would have the privilege of getting gray hairs or wrinkles or any of that. We also probably wouldn't, So I gotta say, my dad, his body, is in desperate need of some lotion. He is looking very ashy, okay? And before anybody in the comments comes for me, my dad would love that joke, okay? I just gotta say. So, but his body, long gone. But my dad still very much exists in our thoughts, in our memories, and like media. So like pictures and recordings that we have of my dad. So that has been much more permanent than his body turned out to be, I gotta say. So I find that to be completely inaccurate. Your body is going to change. It just is. If you don't believe me, have a kid. My goodness, my body has changed a lot after having kids. I mean, I can't run without peeing my pants now, okay? And I know that that's way TMI, but it's accurate for a lot of women, okay? So yes, a lot of things change in your body, whether it be just due to the passage of time, whether it be to the way that you have treated your body. I mean, there's a lot of ways that your body absolutely can change. So that's just very ironic that evidently our body is the most permanent part of us. But if you aren't actively pursuing weight loss, you are seen as glamorizing an unhealthy lifestyle. Well, I do have to be honest. We finally got to a point as a society where we stopped glamorizing smoking, right? They took it out of movies or TV shows, or those that do have it in there, they get higher ratings to try to prevent kids from watching it. So I'm not going to sit there and say whether or not someone choosing to pursue weight loss is glamorizing an unhealthy lifestyle. But I will say that I have seen it play out in other topics, and I see where we've landed on that as a society. So there you have it. Evidently, weight loss should never be talked about with anybody. And if you are going to have a conversation with somebody, you should automatically know the topics you are allowed to talk about with people. And, oh yes, our bodies are completely permanent and will never change. Where I firmly believe that, yes, weight loss is something that we can and should talk about with the right audience. And that, yes, you are able to change your body. And no, unfortunately, as much as we might like it to be, our bodies are not permanent. But let me know down in the comments below, what do you think? I'm genuinely curious, and I love reading all of your responses. That is where we will leave things today. I thank you so much for joining me. Please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you all in the next one. Bye! You gonna say hi? It never fails. Every time I come in here to film, she has to come in and hang out with me. Sometimes I get the other two in here with me. This one, we have Pokey, we also have Tony, and we have Penny. All three of them we adopted from the Humane Society, and I always make sure we always pick out adult kitties because I know that they're typically the hardest to get adopted, but they need love too, of course. And oh my goodness, they're all my babies. But Pokey is about the only one that I can actually pick up. Oh.